So the identity of the hackers of the Colonial Pipeline have been revealed. Apparently they are a hacker group. I'm not going to pretend like I know who they are. I don't follow hacker groups, but they're called Dark Side. And I didn't. I conspicuously avoided the topic of Russia yesterday when I was talking briefly about the hacking of the pipeline, because we didn't know much then. I talked about, potentially, could be probably China, but could be eco-terrorists and things. I didn't even bring up Russia because I knew that the media probably would blame it on Russia anyway, and so I'd have a chance to talk about Russia later. Now, this is, of course, an online group, so I don't think that we know exactly where all of the individuals involved with DarkSide live, but that supposedly, they're supposed to be based in Eastern Europe, like a lot of hackers are, and therefore, we're supposed to gather from that these are agents of the Russian government. Now, I haven't watched all mainstream news. I did not, watch CNN to try and hear how they're presenting the story. But from what I've heard and what I've seen, people are not going to extreme lengths to go to hyperbolic and go like, oh my gosh, Putin hacked our fossil fuels and shut down our pipeline. It doesn't seem like we've escalated to that point yet. I feel like if that was the direction that this were going, every top of the hour news update on the radio would be, Russia's hacked our pipeline, because the U.S. media and the U.S. government is willing to call something Russian hacking with very little evidence. So the fact that they're they're only kind of implying it and not making it 100% clear, and they're saying this was Putin, it makes me think that the Russians 100% had nothing to do with this. In fact, the only person I ever really blaming Putin was Glenn Beck today. But again, I haven't had the time to listen to a ton of mainstream stuff, and not that Glenn Beck's the most mainstream voice, certainly. I mean, he's not on CNN anymore. Used to be on CNN, I remember back in the day. But he's a big Russia hawk, so you would expect him to sort of go out on a limb and blame Putin if you can. But I mean, not even Joe Biden is blaming Putin and the Russians. Biden is saying, hey, currently there's no evidence that Russia was involved with this. And after all the Russia-gating stuff and all of the flat-out stuff that they just made up about Russia doing over the last couple of years, if the Democrats are saying that Russia had nothing to do, that they have no evidence that Russia had to do with this, makes me think that the Russians 100% had nothing to do with it. And so I feel somewhat vindicated in that for not even discussing them as a possibility yesterday. Because again, what incentive does Russia have in hacking U.S.'s pipelines? I don't know, maybe as some kind of way to annoy us and give some payback for what's been going on in Ukraine recently. I mean, the Russians certainly aren't trying to send some kind of a warning about or test their capabilities, to shut down U.S. infrastructure in case of a war with the U.S., because Russia is not going to be planning for a war with the U.S. They would have no reason to try and demonstrate that kind of capability, unlike potentially China, even though, again, I firmly believe that there is not a possibility of a war between the United States and China. At least not as long as halfway reasonable people are in charge of either country. You would need crazy people in charge of both countries, and arguably there's some very dopey, if not crazy, people in charge of the United States right now. But the Chinese, I think, generally, even though I tend to think that they're more evil than the U.S. establishment, I think that they tend to be more rational as well. And so, with that out of the way, back to DarkSide and this whole hack. Apparently, they were contracted to hack this company and to inflict ransomware on their system by a client, and they are quite apologetic. They did not mean to cause social unrest, or perhaps that's the wrong term. They didn't mean to cause problems with the U.S. economy or U.S. society. They didn't want to disrupt a bunch of people's lives. They just were they were just after money. That's at least what they claim. Now, am I 100% confident that they're telling the truth? No, not really. But I do find it kind of interesting how their little press release that they put out on their dark website reads sort of like an old school corporate press release when corporations didn't want to offend anyone, which nowadays the corporations are they're very happy to be offensive to the right in this country. But there was a time when corporations just wanted to say, hey, we just want to serve everyone and not, and we're just trying to provide a good product and do our job. We don't want to upset anybody. That's kind of what these hackers sound like. They're like, hey, we're just trying to extort money from people. We didn't want to actually, affect anyone's quality of life. And they said something like they're going to be putting practices into place to more heavily vet their clients and what they're asking them to do so that they don't cause trouble like this in the future, which I think is kind of funny, the idea of there being some kind of department in a hacker group who has to vet their clients and what they're asking them to do and see what do some sort of risk assessment as to, hey, if we hack these people and shut down their computers, what impact could that have on the society of whatever country they happen to be located in? And so generally on its face, I don't buy into this. I think that they might just be trying to play a joke. And it's not entirely clear because they make it sound like they have a client. Again, I don't know if that's true. But if they're saying that I would assume that's how they generally operate, in that they are sort of hired guns. They go out and they hack people on behalf of others. I would be interested in knowing who that client is, but I doubt we'll ever know. I'm sure this will be pinned on somebody, but the U.S. intelligence community has no incentive to tell the truth or to find the truth about who that is. I think that the U.S. intelligence community doesn't really care who really did it. They would rather pin it on whoever they think they can that is advantageous to them. They would much rather pin it on on some enemy that they want to continue to demonize, even if that group or that individual is not who is responsible in this case. So, for example, kind of think about how they tried to blame Saddam Hussein and Iran and Kim Jong-il for 9/11 for a while there, and say that they're an axis of evil, and kind of loosely associate them with Al Qaeda somehow to justify going to war with those countries. I would expect the U.S. intelligence community to do the same thing in this case, and that doesn't mean that whoever they eventually blame is not guilty. It just means that there is no real relationship between the truth and what the CIA says. If the truth happens to line up and be and align with the CIA's interests, then the CIA will tell the truth. But if whatever best aligns with their interests is not the truth, then the CIA is going to lie, which is why they typically lie. But based on what we're hearing so far, if you have Biden coming out and saying that there's no evidence that Russia did it, and you're not hearing from the beginning, a very sustained campaign about how this was Russian hacking, then it makes me think that they're not going to blame this on Russia. Who knows? Maybe they might blame it on China, because they understand that that just makes more sense. Again, even if that's not true and China's not behind it. Or maybe, it could even be eco-terrorists. You never know. I mean, I think that's a pretty... If you take the mindset of the global warming people, if you get inside their head, they think that the world's going to end. I mean, it's a doomsday cult. They're really concerned about it, honestly. I've met some of them who are very, very serious about it and have told me, with a straight face that, where he and I were standing was going to be underwater within 10 years. And if you're someone who believes that, you would do almost anything to try and stop that from happening, to try and do something to change that. In fact, I'm surprised that we don't see more eco-terrorism, considering the level of, hysteria that's whipped up by the media about this. Because, the media tells people, hey, the world's going to end. You've got Greta out there saying, how dare you? you know, spewing her nonsense. And so if you're someone who has the means to hire this hacker group to shut down the oil supply for 45% of the east coast of the United States, why wouldn't you do it? I mean, I would consider myself an environmentalist. I don't go along with the global warming cultists. But I mean, if I think about just how I'm an environmentalist in the old school sense, that I care about the local environment and I care about people, chopping down old growth trees and things and destroying, the habitat for native wildlife and, creating a monoculture. And I think, I'm passionate about that. And I think, sometimes when I see forests being clear-cut here, it saddens me. And I think, gee, if I were an unstable person, I might commit acts of violence out of passion. Now, luckily, I'm a well-adjusted person, and I don't believe in using violence to get my way. But maybe if I thought that these people who were clear-cutting this forest were going to bring about the apocalypse, maybe I'd feel a bit differently. Maybe if I were one of the global warming cultists, I would, be willing to resort to more extreme measures. So to close out this story about the pipeline, I didn't think it was that important yesterday. I still don't think it's that important today, even though a lot of people are talking about it. It's a scary thing. There's a bunch of oil tankers that are having to ship over oil from Europe to try and make up for the decline in the supply here on the East Coast, because we can't move our oil as quickly because this pipeline's been crippled. But this is ultimately going to be a temporary thing. This is not going to cause the end of the current business cycle. It's not going, we could see a short-term spike in gas prices, but I don't even know if it would impact crude prices. If anything, the crude prices, the futures market, WTI could take a hit from this, because oil could start piling up in Texas at the refineries because they can't ship it east. But in due time, this pipeline will be back up and running, and this will all be a thing of the past. I mean, I would have been much more concerned about that whole blockage of the Suez Canal, since you don't necessarily know how long it would take them to get that resolved, and it's blocking not just oil but the movement of everything. But even that it wasn't even a blip in the global economy. I don't remember being impacted by it personally at all. And then here we are many weeks or months later, and everybody's forgotten about it. It'll be the same thing with this pipeline. So that's that, and I'm going to leave it off here.